Dan, first and foremost, thanks again for making the time.
My pleasure. Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, my first question, where I wanted to start was in line with the theme for the whole conversation, which is what makes email distinct from other mediums like writing a blog post, posting on Twitter, etc.
So the thing that I've always been amazed by with email is how much of an impact it can have, even if you don't have the world's biggest audience. So my very first newsletter I launched in 2012. It was called Tools for Reporters, and it is exactly what you think it is. It was an email that every week I sent tools that reporters could use that I had tested out and tried. It's actually still going. Some younger grads from University of Missouri took it over a few years ago and have done an awesome job growing that audience. But that was a newsletter that out of the gate got a few hundred subscribers through folks on Twitter, and I emailed some friends in the journalism world and shared it around, and I got a few hundred folks. And I probably had far more than that on Twitter and way more than that in terms of Facebook friends and LinkedIn contacts. But when I would post something to any of those other channels, I had this new thing, I think you should read it. Nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing would happen. I may not post a tweet, 0 responses, 0 likes, no comments. It was just like I was screaming into the void. And then I would send an email to 500 people, and people would be like, hey, you should come over and chat with us at the office. Like job interviews would happen. People would reach out. Do you want to like guest post on our blog? The response that I got from email was always amazing, even when it was a pretty small audience. I think that's also really important for writers too. When you're just getting started, even with 100 people on your email list, sometimes you're writing, you're doing your work, and you're putting out into the world, and you feel like nobody's listening. But with an email, you send 100 people an email. Here's what I'm working on. Here's this new piece that I have. You almost always get a couple of responses. You get some notes back. People are actually listening, which is really powerful. It also, I think, makes you take your work a little more seriously, because you're not just writing for shits and giggles. You're writing because you actually have an audience. People are listening. Maybe it's not the audience you want it to be or hope it will be one day, but someone's out there. For me, email was just one of those tools where it was such a powerful way to actually have real conversations with folks. The thing that I love about email too is, and a lot of this was actually shaped by the very first job I had at a college was at a CBS station in San Antonio, Texas, which in the 80s was responsible for the most watched local TV newscasts in the country. There was a point in the 80s where 60% of TVs that were turned on at 6 p.m. were watching Ken's 5. And these were folks who, I can dig up the photo later for you all. These were folks who dressed and looked like the cast of Anchorman, like lime green, pink, red suits on air and the popped collars. The whole thing was incredible. But people had a real relationship with them. And I remember going and being in San Antonio all those years later, and our staff would be out at events. San Antonio is just like a really big, small town. So there'd be parades and events, and our team would be out in the field. And folks would just walk up to them and start having a conversation as though they'd been picking up a conversation that had been started like years and years earlier, or they'd just been chatting with Chris Maru like a week ago and just like picking it up where they left off. And then you'd ask them, do you know this person? No, we don't know them, but we're on in the living room. Like we're watching TV, it's dinner time, the TV's on in the background, they're talking about what we're talking about, they know our banter, like they have a relationship. And that always stuck with me. Broadcast TV has always been thought of as this like totally broadcast medium. Like we report, it goes out to you, that's the end of the conversation. Email was also that sort of channel for a long time. People just thought about it. Here's all the stories, here's all the work, here's all the stuff that I have. I just produce like a feed of stories and send it out to you. There's no curation, there's no personality, it just goes out into the world just for pure consumption. And what shifted is people started to think about, oh no, like this is actually like their living room they're letting me into. The inbox is their space. They say, I want, you to come in and bring good stuff to me, and I'm letting you in, prove like your worthiness in my inbox every single time. And that totally shifted people's behavior, because they started thinking about, oh, if they're giving me a chance, I have to, one, build a relationship with them, make sure that I'm giving them good stuff every time I send them things, and constantly be proving my worth so I deserve my place in here. And the ones who don't are going to get kicked out. And so I really got to earn my place. And that's really shifted it, because now you're seeing people think about emails. It's got to be more personal. It's got to be more curated. It's got to be really powerful and useful. It also has to be a little more conversational. I want to have emails in my inbox where people are asking me things and giving me a chance to reply. I want to start a conversation. I want to learn more about you and have you have the chance to learn more about me. And the people who take advantage of that, the relationship part of email, the conversational part of email tend to do really well with email.
I know it's such a powerful idea that you're right. I think there's this mental model of I'm sending out to 1,000 people or 500 people. It's me distributing this idea to them. But in reality, as a recipient, you're just getting one email from one person. And it's a little bit more of a one-to-one relationship as a reader. And like you said, the inbox is a very personal place. So if you're there, I probably want you there. I really have invited you in. I love the broadcast analogy. I've invited these anchors into my living room. I've invited you into my inbox. So I'm given that framing. I'm curious of all the people you've worked with, all the organizations, all the individuals you've worked with, how do most people just misunderstand how to use email effectively? Meaning, even if they maybe start to grasp this concept that it can be a much more personal medium, what are some of the biggest kind of mistakes or just things that folks overlook as they go to actually start using email more?
So it's a really good question. There's a few things that I think people are missing out on. One is it often starts with the metrics that you have in mind for what success looks like and working backwards. So for instance, when I started working with a lot of news organizations, the first thing they would ask would be, well, how big is our list? How big can our list get? And how much traffic is this going to drive to my story? I want to launch a newsletter because a newsletter will magically rain traffic down from the sky upon my story and people will read my work and see how brilliant I am. I always told folks, like, if your goal is purely traffic, like, we probably shouldn't be doing a newsletter. Your goal, we should have set other goals around conversation, relationships, engagement, learning, some sort of conversion. Like, we should be setting other sorts of goals first. Traffic may be an outcome of having a really good newsletter, but it shouldn't be the very first thing. So I think one starts with understanding like what success looks like for you. What do you actually need from your audience? What do you want from them? What do you want them to do? And how do you want to help and serve them in the long run? The more that you can set those goals up front, the better you're going to be able to tailor your email to serving them to deliver the things that you want. That's one thing. Another is just a misunderstanding of just what your audience needs. A lot of the people that I talk with, people sign up for Not a Newsletter. The first thing I do when someone signs up for Not a Newsletter is you get a series of 6 emails from me over the course of the first 60 days. But the very first one is, hey, I'm Dan. I'd love to know, what are you working on in terms of newsletters and what are you struggling with? Reply, I actually want to hear from you. And about 1 in 5 folks who open that email actually write back to me and we start a conversation. It's really fun and I get to learn a lot from my audience. And so with that sort of thing, like, I know one of the things, metrics for me for success is like conversations. Like, if I start a conversation, that's a really good thing. Now, my outcome is ultimately driving people to be like, become a client of mine and work with mine ideally, or share their work with people who might become clients. But those conversations help along the way. They also help me learn. And the reason that people write back is because my audience is really well defined. I write a really long briefing every single month around email. It's for people who work in this space, who are either solo creators or newsrooms or nonprofits or brands who like need email to make their business or their work go. And so when I ask them a question, it's super specific. My question is like, what are you struggling with newsletters? And everyone who works in the space has something they need help with. The fact that I have that specificity is really useful because it feels like an email just to them. It feels like I'm building something just to help that audience. So I think one of the other things that I see is people will build an email, they'll build a newsletter strategy, but there isn't that specific audience in mind. They don't really know who they're trying to serve. I get a lot of folks who reach out to me in my inbox and say, I'm launching this email and every week I share like the 5 stories that I read that week that I thought were great. And it's going to be the biggest newsletter in the world. The people at the Skim and the Hustle and Morning Brew one day will like look at my newsletter and be like, I can't believe this. I can't believe we didn't do this too, or whatever it is. And be like, yeah, here's the thing. Like, you're sharing the stuff that you like. Is there like a framework? Is there a topic? Like, no, it's just whatever I come across that week. Yeah, people aren't really hurting for like stuff to read. If you don't really have and then I have to break it to them. If you tell me your audience, and they'll ultimately ask, do you have an audience in mind? The audience is anybody. The audience is anyone who's like interested and curious and smart. It's usually like, yeah, here's the bad news. Like, I've talked to 1,000 of the people who said they've launched the newsletter. It's like smart links for smart, curious people. Like, there's not that many winners in that space. Like usually if your newsletter is for everybody, it's really not for anybody. And so having a really specific audience in mind, knowing how you uniquely serve them is really important. People tend to miss that, and their product is like, it's too general. Well, if it's too general, like, why am I letting you in? Why am I giving you time? I think of I'm sure there's some Seinfeld fans in this call, the famous pitch where George and Jerry are pitching their TV show to the NBC executives. And they're like, why are you watching it? Because it's on TV. I'm like, not yet. Like, you really have to earn your place and make sure, like, why is this thing valuable? Why would I spend my time on this thing? And no, if you can prove that, if you can prove to your audience that I know who you are and how to serve them, growing your audience is actually not super hard once you define that, because you're going to be able to think, oh, I knew for me personally, for instance, like when I was launching Not a Newsletter, this is going out to an audience of email people. Like there are some Facebook groups that I know that are like email specific. I should be sharing stuff in those groups and make sure people know about my doc. I should be going to places where my audience, who are at the start was really like journalists and nonprofits, like where do these folks live? What do they go and turn to? Oh, like these people are opening newsletters from places like Meme and Lab or Pointer. How do I get in front of them in those spaces where they might be? How do I insert myself into the conversations and spaces where my audience might be, get in front of them and really share the good stuff that I'm doing? Once I knew who I was building for, it became pretty easy for me to figure out like, oh, okay, like I know who these people look like, what they do, what they're interested in. I just have to find the places where they are and get in front of them so I can get to my first, 500, first 1,000 subscribers.
Yeah, I love that. Something we talked about earlier on when we were getting ready for the call was the idea of how to maybe go about building that home base and figuring out what your thing is. And you mentioned maybe the importance of doing kind of non-scalable things, getting feedback. But I'm curious how you would think if you were launching a fresh newsletter tomorrow, how would you think about finding and really clearly defining who you're going after?
There's two ways to get your first 1,000 fans. That's not sure. There's three ways. One is you already have a pre-existing audience, thousands of people, and you just tell them, hey, guess what, guys? This new thing is here. You'll all love it. I don't think that's the issue that any of you guys are struggling with. Option number two is that you can just go out and spend a whole bunch of money on Facebook ads and tell people, why don't you sign up for my newsletter? Probably also not the strategy you want to go. Route number three is the unsexy route, which is the doing things that don't scale, which is, all right, I know this is the audience. Where might my audience live and how do I get in front of them? They're on Reddit, they're on YouTube, they're listening to these podcasts. How do I get into these spaces too? I thought about this when I was getting going about stuff like events and conferences. All right, I was writing initially for largely a journalism audience. Last year, it's tough to believe that it was only a year ago. It was the fall of 2019, and I was at an event in person with thousands of other people in New Orleans, like crowded into bars and spaces. It seems tough to imagine that that's a thing that we could have done. But I remember one of the things that I did was I started to build an audience that was growing, that was doing pretty well. I'd launched the consulting thing, and I threw a happy hour at a completely unlicensed, non-conference approved happy hour for anyone interested in email. And a whole bunch of people showed up, and I got to shake hands, and people brought their friends because, someone who works in this space for Snow Newsroom probably knows somebody else. And they'd be like, hey, do you know Dan, this guy who writes that Google Doc thing? You should come to his happy. And then they would meet me and like, I got to sign up for this thing. Like, where do I go? And that sort of thing, while one, great for me, like I got to meet lots of folks and have conversations, but two, just a cool opportunity for me to do something that was totally unscalable. Like happy hours are not a scalable event, but that event led to a bunch of new client work for me, but also a bunch of new readers for my Google Doc because people brought out their friends and then they met me and they're like, this guy seems pretty legit. We'll read his thing. A lot of what you're doing at the start are things that don't scale. A lot of it is personal outreach. A lot of it is having conversations on other platforms, doing press, doing media, and thinking about the stuff that allows you to get to that first 1,000 true fans, the people who have a relationship with you, have spoken with you, and trust you. Once you're there, then you get into the fun stuff of being able to grow, which is, all right, I got 1,000, I got 2,000 fans. Maybe I have enough people now to try a referral program in my newsletter. Maybe I have enough people now that I should start thinking about creating some sorts of lead magnets. Like I'm going to create some sort of guide or resource that people would say, this is cool. I want more of this stuff from you. I'll sign up to get access to this resource and also add myself to the newsletter list. And your audience will share that naturally with their people on Facebook or email or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever it might be. You start thinking about producing content that's going to drive people in that your audience might share. As you scale and grow, Your audience does a lot of the work for you in being evangelists for your product. The really hard part is the first 1,000 or 2,000 people, because when you have 10 fans and you tell them go share the word of my newsletter with the world, they only know so many people. You got to get to a little bit of scale before there are enough folks out there who you start getting those fun kind of moments of serendipity where someone in your audience says this stuff is great, I got to share it. And it turns out they have an email listserv, they have a newsletter themselves, they have a Twitter following, they have a LinkedIn, and they share it, and suddenly 50 people sign up for your newsletter all at once. Go, cool, okay, that's great. One person got me 50, takes a while to get to the first 1,000. A lot of it's just doing stuff that doesn't scale. How can I make real human contact with other people and be useful for them and get enough of those people on board so that way I can start to do the fun growth sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I know. I think a referral program, when you have 100 people, just the math isn't there. It's just not really it just won't do much. I love how many kind of one-on-one conversations you've had with your readers. And even today, like you said in your newsletter, in the welcome message, there's 2 questions that, 1 out of 5 people respond to. How has getting feedback early on from your readers, from your potential future readers, helped shape the course of some of your own work?
I wouldn't be doing the thing that I'm doing right now if I hadn't been asking for feedback. I never intended, I was at the New Yorker. It was a good job. It's a really good job. It was an amazing team. I was learning a lot. It was the New Yorker. It was the kind of thing I remember as someone asked me a while back, was it a dream job? To be honest, I was never ambitious enough to dream that I could have gotten to a place like the New Yorker. That wasn't even on my radar of places that I could have gotten a job at. Never had fantasies of working there. That was too ambitious for me. So getting to work there was really an incredible experience. I wasn't looking to leave. It happened by accident. It happened because I would send people, that was the welcome series, and ask them for feedback. And they'd be like, what are you struggling with? And over the course of a couple months, I launched Not a Newsletter in January of 2019. And between then and maybe about May, I'd get a couple emails every single month from folks so we love the Google Doc. We really want to get smarter about email. We have this budget to hire somebody to help us figure our stuff out. Who's the person we talk to? And then I would write back and be like, oh man, that person should really exist. It would be so great if there was a person you could turn to, an idiot, kept saying this. It would be so amazing if there was this person. I got a full-time job. I'm so busy at the New Yorker. I really wish I could recommend someone to you. And then at some point, my wife was like, people keep asking you who the person is. You are the person they're asking for. Okay. And then I had to make this weird decision. All right, am I going to leave my job to do this? And I decided I really wanted to. I thought there was a cool opportunity and a chance for me to help and help make a lot of people a lot smarter and just be a force for good in this kind of ecosystem. So I decided to make the leap. The weird conversation to have with the team at the New Yorker to tell them that your Google Doc got too popular, so now you have to go do consulting. New Yorker staff typically leave for best-selling books, or I got a job at the New York Times. This is not on the list of exit things they do in the exit interview. It's not one of the check boxes. But that was because I kept reaching out to people and saying, what do you need help with? And they told me what they needed help with was hands-on help, coaching, strategy work. And actually, as a result of that, all the work that I do consulting-wise is almost entirely dictated by the feedback that I got from my audience. They told me, and when I even launched, officially told people that I was going to leave the New Yorker and do this, the first thing I said was, I'm going to set up time over the next couple of weeks. Anyone who wants 30, 45 minutes to talk about what you're struggling with, I just want to talk with as many people to figure out how I can position my services to help. I was actually still at the New Yorker, which meant that I was basically doing 2 full-time jobs. One, which was spending as much time as possible on calls, talking with people who might be clients one day, and then also doing my job. And it was a lot, but all those conversations helped shape the work that I actually do today and continue to. The more that I ask, the more that I learn, even little things I'll do a survey in my onboarding series where every couple of months I'll switch out one of the questions and just test out as a focus group sort of thing. I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Would that be interesting to you? Just to put a little dip a toe into the water, get a feeler out there. I would encourage everybody, ask for feedback, give them permission to write back to you, try to start a conversation. Because that stuff is where the good stuff happens. There's others smarter than me who have said Your audience will often be able to tell you when something is wrong. They won't be able to tell you necessarily what's right, but they will definitely tell you when something is like wrong or needs fixing, and be willing to listen to them. Sometimes, and this happens a lot, people will give you feedback that you don't like and it sucks, and you just have to take it as an opportunity to get smarter and better and keep working to get to a place where you want to be.
I love that. Yeah, your story of realizing this void in the market reminds me of, I think, the end of Dumb and Dumber, where they're stranded in the desert and a bus full of supermodels asks where the next town is, and they point them on their way and keep walking in the desert.
Have a nice day. Yeah. No, I hadn't
Right,
thought about that
nice
one, but yeah, I would have to look. I'm happy to compare myself to Jim Carrey if that's what you're asking me to do.
Boy. Well, this is a perfect segue to something, and I do promise we're going to get into more email specific things, but I love this as a foundation. One thing we've thought a lot about is, what is quality? What does it mean to produce good work, to build trust with people, to set a bar for yourself? I know it's a bit open-ended, but I am curious to hear how you think of what's the bar for quality work. How do you know if you're actually delivering value to your readers? I'm curious to get your kind of take there.
So one is, they will tell you over time whether or not the stuff is good or not, but you are going to be your own best judge of what you think is what is valuable. I know the way I do like my Google Doc is it goes out once a month, and it's just this big dump of stuff that I'm thinking about, reading, lessons, learnings, yada, yada. And I can get away with it because I think the content is good enough and there's enough in there that people don't mind. They know it usually shows up in the middle of the month. They don't know exactly when, but it feels like when it arrives, oh, the thing is here. And it seems to work out okay. A lot of times I'll get this question around, should I send my email like once a week and have it be like a little less great, or twice a week, or twice a month, or once a month and have it be like this amazing thing? The answer is just like, you should do it as frequently as you can, as long as it's really good. Like, as long as the quality, and you will be your own best judge, as long as you think you're producing something that's super valuable, that people are going to learn a lot from, or are going to enjoy, or going to want to spend time with, as long as you feel like you can keep the quality high, and only you really know like where the bar is going to be set, as long as you can do that, you can send your email as frequently as you want. I don't know, I've always found that you typically have a better sense of what you think is going to be great. It's certainly the audience feedback helps though, because those surveys, those questions, that'll give you a good sense. Are people spending time? Email is also really nice in that you get a pretty clear sense of the basic metrics. Are people opening my newsletter? Are they clicking through? Are they writing back to me? If I ask them to take a survey, do they give me feedback? Like, there's lots of useful, actionable stuff. It's like driving a car. You got a lot of different metrics on the dashboard. You're just trying to keep track of those things and seeing, does everything seem to be running just fine? Your email dashboard's a little like that, like opens, clicks, engagement, habit. You're just looking to make sure that everything's trending in the right direction while keeping in mind your own sense of what you think is really good. This is going to be valuable.
I love it. That literally answers my next question, which is, how do you think about cadence versus quality? That's a great metric. Publish as frequently as you think you actually have something good to share.
Yeah, it does good. I remember doing this at BuzzFeed, where we had a couple newsletters. We had this DIY newsletter that was great. It went out 3 days a week because that's how often we could send it and have it be really good. We tried to do it. We talked about doing it more frequently. It's like, we don't have enough content. It's not going to be good enough. And frankly, people are going to get tired of it if we do more than this. 3 times a week is what we max out at. But we're going to make sure that every time we send it, it's really freaking good and that people are excited to see our name in the inbox. And so we did as much as we could at the quality that we thought we needed to keep. It did us no good though. If we went 5 days a week, 7 days a week, and the quality suffered, we wouldn't have built much of an audience in the long run.
Love it. Cool. Well, now as promised, we'll actually talk a little bit more about email specifically as a medium. And this is not so theoretical, because I think a lot of folks are really starting to open their eyes with what's possible with email. If I'm a blogger, our group is mostly online writers, independent writers, and I'm just starting to use email. Maybe up until today, I've just thought of it as a way to send out my latest blog post, and that's pretty much it. I'd love to just talk about the foundations of email and almost like basic email hygiene. For example, you read about onboarding recently. But yeah, I guess I'm curious, what are those bare bone things that folks who are just getting started leveraging email should think about and put in place?
So the first thing is really the tech stack that you have in place to support email. And so depending on what you choose, let's use a hypothetical here. Let's say MailChimp is the most commonly used email service provider in the world. 60% of all emails, marketing emails in the world are sent out via MailChimp. They own this ridiculous lock on the market. So let's assume like you decided to go with MailChimp. I'm by no means endorsing MailChimp as the number one thing that everyone should go to. Just to give you an example. Like, all right, MailChimp's where I'm going to send my emails. Great. MailChimp has some automations built in. So I'm going to set up a welcome series. So any new subscribers who come on board get a couple emails from me in the first few weeks. So I tell them what they're going to get and when they're going to get it. I tell them a little bit more about me. Maybe I share some like previous writings that I've done that might be useful. Maybe I want to set up time to talk with them. Maybe I want to have them take a survey, whatever it might be. Maybe I want to sell them something. Who knows? But we're going to build out that automation series so that way people can go through and start to build a relationship over the first couple of weeks. Great. So I got MailChimp. I set up my welcome series in there. I build out a template. Cool. Then you start thinking about on your side, all right, I got a WordPress site. How am I going to start to convert people from reading my site, reading my blog to newsletter subscribers? So then you start to look at various tools, something like an opt-in monster or Write Message. There's a bunch of them popped in. There's a million of these out there. But all right, I got to have a tool set up so that way someone comes to my website, I hit them with a pop-up or a message that says, did you know I have this awesome newsletter? Here's what's in it. Here's why you're going to love it. So I have that kind of flow. Once you have the basic tool set up, then you start thinking about long-term. Maybe I want to produce some lead magnets. You get access to this guide, this resource, this story in exchange for an email address. Cool. If I have the right tech in play, then I can set those things up pretty easily. Maybe you have a pretty simple site and you need something like Card or one of these kind of open source sorts of no code sorts of tools to allow you to grow your list quickly. Lots of good tools out there. But first is like, what is my tech stack? Do I have the right pieces in play to grow my list and convert people from reading my stuff to becoming subscribers? Do I know what my ESP is? And have I set up like the basics in there in terms of like automations? So that way there's a basic funnel. Come to my site, read a story, see a pop-up, sign up for my newsletter, go through a welcome series, start getting emails. Cool. So that's something that everybody should be thinking about at the start. From there, you get to start making some really fun choices about kind of where you want to take your newsletter and what you want to do with it. Do I need to have a lot of segmentation in my email to try to reach within my email list different sorts of audiences? So I have 3 different audiences. They all sign up for my newsletter, but I want to tag or segment these in a certain way. So certain people get certain types of messages. Like that might be helpful. Depending on how sophisticated your software is. For instance, if any of you are using like a Substack is great and they do a lot of great things, but they don't offer segmentation or automation. It's like a fairly bare bones simple system. So if it's using something like that, you're just thinking about, I'm grabbing the embed code and getting it on my website in as many places as possible to convert my audience. And then that's fun. Once you get going, there's a lot of stuff out there that you'll read that are just really doesn't apply to you, especially as you're getting started with email. You'll read different sites that'll tell you like, here's the magic way to get into the good parts of the inbox, and a lot of that stuff is honestly crap. The stuff that works is have a welcome series, ask questions, get people to engage with your emails. If people open and click and write back to you, basically treat your emails like an email from a friend, your emails are going to do fine in the long run. Most of the email software out there is going to help with some of the basic deliverability stuff, especially as you get going. You don't have to worry too much about those sorts of things. I've rambled on too long, and I honestly don't even remember what the question was at the start. Feel free to direct me back towards the solid land still.
That was good. That was the lay of the land question, which is exactly what I wanted. The thing that I'm really curious, and I actually just so happened you wrote about it this month, but the thing that I've certainly undervalued, and I think I'm sure a lot of other folks have been thinking about how to maybe set up, is an awesome onboarding series. Like, how do you get, because right now you subscribe to my personal email, for example, you get one welcome email and then you just start getting the email, and that's the weekly email. That's the whole experience. Yeah. I'm probably not leveraging that to the extent that I could. I would suspect a lot of other folks have a similar setup. I'd love to hear you explain, maybe 2-part question, why a welcome series really matters, what that opportunity represents, and then maybe how to think through doing that effectively.
So the welcome series is awesome because it does a couple things, and because it's automated, it does these things in the background for you while you're sleeping. It allows you to build a real relationship with your audience, to tell your audience, here's what I'm all about, here's why I do the work that I do, here's some of the stuff that you can read and get from me, which is super useful. It is really good at converting people to supporting your work. If you're asking people to subscribe, buy, pay for something, become a member, whatever it is, emails are really good. That onboarding series is a great way to get people from point A to point B. But then it's just in terms of like inbox placement and engagement. The more that people engage early on with your emails, basically anytime you send somebody an email and Gmail sees, oh, Dan sent this email and a bunch of people opened it, clicked on it, replied to it, engaged with it, like this email must be good. And keep in mind, nobody writes back to an email from Old Navy or whatever. If they send you an email, no one's like, dear Old Navy, I have some thoughts on these poundage chinos today. Like, they only write back to emails basically from their family or friends. So if you ask them to take steps like replying to the email, asking them to click, getting them to engage, like doing all that stuff early on just sends positive signals. That way your emails typically end up in the good parts of the inbox, not spam. But in terms of building out a series, there's a couple different types of emails to send. One is, I call it the Hallmark email because the subject line is usually very Hallmark cardy. Thanks, congrats, welcome. You've signed up for my newsletter. Here's what you're going to get and when you're going to get it. Maybe ask them a question too, or share a story or something, just like something for as soon as they sign up to give them a reason to click and open and engage. A couple of days later, I call these the talking head emails. This is basically a letter from you to the audience. I want to tell you a little about me. Here's what I'm working on. Here's why I do the stuff that I do. Just build a relationship there. Then after that, you start sending an email, maybe once a week or every 5-7 days. You might be sharing evergreen resources, stories, links, posts, whatever it might be that might be useful. You might want to think about, if you're trying to sell someone to a couple weeks in, giving them a hard sell. Hey, I want you to support my work and here's how you can do that. But first, having a couple of those emails in place. That way, when you ask them, the example I'll give when I was at the New Yorker, when I got there, one of the mistakes that they had been making was as soon as someone signed up for the New Yorker's email list, you started getting them bombarded with these asks from Condé Nast, or the parent company. They'd be like, hey, you just signed up for the New Yorker's email list. Would you like to subscribe to Bon Appetit? Would you like to subscribe to Teen Vogue? And you're like, I just signed up like 12 minutes ago. I haven't even subscribed and started paying the New Yorker yet. Like, Teen Vogue, get out of here. And so we put this kind of moratorium. It's like 30 days. You can't talk to our folks until we told them enough about the New Yorker first. And even at the New Yorker, and I thought this was amazing, we would send these emails out to our audience and tell them about stuff like our podcasts. And people were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You guys have a podcast? Yeah. You're not going to believe this, but David Remnick every week does an hour-long podcast where he interviews New Yorker writers and they talk about great stories. And and then people are like, has this been there the whole time? This has been there the whole time. Like, people weren't even, and we were like, we're the New Yorker. I feel like we're not like that big of an organization. We have some cool stuff going on. I feel like people would know about this. And even at the New Yorker, we found people had no idea the depths of the stuff that we did. And we really had to educate them. And the same thing is true for you. Make sure they know who you are, what you're all about. And that way, when you get to the point later on where you're asking them to support your work, well, they got to know you. They saw the work that you've done. They read some of your stuff. They've heard from people. They've heard from you, or they've heard from the team. And now when you ask them to do a thing, I want you to take an action. I want you to support my work. They're ready to, because they know a little about you. They have a relationship with you.
Amazing. And God, there's so much to go there. Because I think one thing I was curious to ask about is like, there's always this tension of like, maybe what I want, if you will, or what I find interesting, what I want, and what will be very valuable to my audience. And I love thinking through this series because you have this chance to build this, not only maybe credibility, but almost this relationship with these new readers.
Oh, yeah.
And so I guess I'm curious with some of the folks that you've worked with, what are some of the most effective ways to accelerate the relationship building and really get somebody drinking the Kool-Aid as early as possible? You mentioned maybe giving away some evergreen content and like giving away some value, but maybe just curious to hear about maybe the mindset you should have when you're creating this sequence.
One thing I think that is and plays to everyone on this call, everyone who's listening, you all are writers. The really good advantages that you all have is the best onboarding series are all about just telling a story over the course of a couple of weeks. It's just spreading out like, here's the story of who I am and what I'm all about. And I'm going to tell it to you in a couple different installments over a few weeks so you really get to know me and learn from me. These emails should be personal. They should feel like a letter from you to the reader, like just a personal note. Just wanted to drop you a note, say hi, tell you a few things. My favorite is when I get folks who write back to my automation, my welcome series. And they're like, thank you so much for the note today. It meant so much for you to reach out. And I always would be like, you guys know that was like a 100% automation, right? Everyone gets that email, but it's cool because people treat it as though, like, some people treat it as though it's like a personal note. I just dropping a note to say hi. I just want to let you know that I'm here. And that's fun. Means that I've written in a way that people feel like it's not an automation. It's not like, I'm not just checking a box that MailChimp made me check or whatever. If like, all right, email number 3, here we go. This is the one where I share a link to my most popular blog post of all time. Please click the link. No, like, this feels like a real note. And for you, as you build out these series, I would actually think about like, how do you share your own personal story? How do you tell people more about who you are and why you care about the things that you do? And can I give people these like little drips of content over the course of a few weeks so they get to know me a little better, and I share different parts of the story. So like I do this with mine, for instance. The second email you get talks about like I go back to like my first day at BuzzFeed and talk about what it was like showing up and having the story there is our head of product walked me to my desk and it's like, do you know what you're doing? And he meant it in a very like general sense, like, do you have everything you need to get started? I have to go back to my job. But I took it in the like very literal sense. Do you know what you're doing in this job? And it's like, no, I have no idea. Please help. I was hoping there was going to be like a manual or something on my first day. Someone at BuzzFeed, like, here's the big book of all the things to do with email. Here you go. Just color in between the lines and stuff. Don't break anything. You'll be fine. So I go back and I tell that story and I share the lessons that I've learned, and all through the sequence. It's all about, here's what I'm learning. Here's my path. Here's my own story. So people feel like they know a little about me, and in a genuine way, not just I'm trying to speed through this process as quickly as possible so I can start selling you crap. Like I genuinely want to know you to know a little about me, and I really do want to know a little about you too.
Incredible. And I know we've blazed past my time as a bad timekeeper here. So we will do the Q&A in this last 15 minutes. Everyone on the call, because we've got a manageable group. So I think we can just unmute and anyone's welcome to chime in. So start thinking of questions if you have them. I was going to end on one question that I was curious to get Dan's input on, but start thinking about maybe some specific things you'd love to ask Dan. Dan, the final thing I was going to ask, and maybe again, two-parter, is around metrics and measuring how you're doing, if you will, measuring how much folks are really valuing what you're sharing. So I'm curious how you think about using metrics to determine how you're doing. And then I'm also curious how you continue to factor in maybe more qualitative feedback as well. So a bit of a big one, but
I'll do qualitative, then I'll do quantitative. Qualitative is, I'm just trying to look for trends. It's almost, if you imagine like the word cloud building in your head of when people reach out and you keep hearing the same things over and over again. Like if in my head, I've lately, for instance, a lot of the questions I've been getting are like, how do I scale my paid newsletter? I'm like, oh, okay. People keep asking around this, which means there's a need. And if people are turning to me, it means that there's not anything else there. So how do I build something to help this audience? Something I've been thinking about a lot. Like I keep getting the question, people keep asking, I need to be thinking about how I can orient a lot of my work to serving them because I'm getting that feedback. That's really crucial. And that's really how I build it in. I'm just trying to keep my ear to the ground, listening for trends, trying to spot things that might be interesting or useful. In terms of the actual hard numbers, it really depends on what your email service provider is and what you're using. Some of these will provide the ability to, for instance, with like MailChimp and you have a WordPress blog and you have Google Analytics. Cool. If you go into Not a Newsletter in the resources section, there's a list of some Google Analytics dashboards you can use. You can hook up GA and MailChimp and just say, cool, add some tracking links. I want to see if people are clicking through to my stories, how long they spend on my stories, what this audience looks like. There's some dashboards and stuff those are free and available to anybody you can use to track metrics. The one other thing, depending on what email service provider you use, is I think a lot about loyalty. So some ESPs will give you some stats to show you like, how loyal is this audience? They spend a lot of time with your newsletters, so they frequently open your emails. And that is really useful for me too, more so than just straight up clicks. Like, do people frequently open these things? Do they spend time with them? Even if they didn't click today, did they open it and did they come back to me? That's really interesting. So I would encourage you, don't just look at open rate, be thinking about, do people click? Be thinking about loyalty. If you have a system that can handle it, set up those Google Analytics dashboards to track to see what people do once they come to your site. Are they spending time reading the stories and the work that you're doing? That's really valuable too. And then certainly conversions at the end of the day. Like, one of the big things is if you're trying to make money off of your work, if I'm selling something, are they buying? And you'll be able to track pretty clearly in just about any email service provider, like what percentage of my audience am I actually converting from newsletter subscriber to paying supporter.
100%. Cool. I think it is now time for some Q&A. So who would, you're welcome to just unmute. I think, Josh, I see you unmuted. So take the floor.
Awesome. Hey, Dan. So I'm definitely one of those, my audience is everybody people. And no, you're totally fine. And I've definitely had trouble like zeroing in on a particular audience. And honestly, it seems really like nebulous to me. Like, how do you know when you've got an audience? Is there an audience as a service kind of website where you can identify them and be like, oh, I'll take that audience and start writing stuff?
There should just be a place where you can go and I can just claim this, like this is the Westward Ho, like Oklahoma. They're just like rushing out across the frontier and be like, this is my land, this spot right here. Email, newsletters, and newsrooms. I've claimed this territory. You all can go on. You can try other things. I got this space. No, there should be. That would be really fun. I think that's probably, there's a joke in here about that's what Twitter is for or something. But yeah, I think for you, honestly, when I've gone back and done this, and I even have in the Google Doc, there's this worksheet you can go in and play around with this. When I've done this in the past with teams, I want you to imagine a recent past where people would be like in an office with a whiteboard and stuff. But when I'd sit down with the team, cool, I want us to put on the board like all the types of people we're trying to reach. What do we know about all these types of people? So if it was a local newsroom, for instance, we'd go in and be like, all right, we're in Boston, Massachusetts. This is our audience. Here's what they look like. Here's what they're interested in. Here's what they care about. Here's everything we might know about them or think we know about them. And then we'd start thinking about what do these people have in common? What might they need from me? And like different ways that we could serve them, and think about the job to be done of this newsletter. What am I going to do? The equivalent version, for instance, for newsrooms of my audience is everybody is like, what's the goal of the newsletter? To inform people. Like, oh, the goal of our newsletter is to inform people. Oh, yes, but let's go a little deeper there. Like, you're a local newsroom trying to help folks. Like, how do you inform people? Are you doing the Axios thing where it's, I want to get smarter on certain topics? Or are you doing the Washington Post things? I want to do like really deep dives into certain issues. Is the thing like, I want to be the first to know, in which case like a CNN breaking news alert kind of thing is like the way we serve our audience. Like, how do you actually inform people? What is it that they get from you? And you can do the same kind of thing. It's just thinking first, they're like, who are the types of people who might be interested in my thing? And I would encourage you to start smaller. Like, feel free to start as niche as possible. And then just be thinking through, what would these people all need from me that might be useful? And how can I frame my work in a way that might make sense for them? It's actually okay if it turns out the audience you start building for isn't the one that you end up building for, but it just helps to start with somebody in mind. Because then, like, for instance, Joshua, like, you're on your website, you have your WordPress site, and you run a pop-up and you're telling people like, sign up for my newsletter. Ideally, your sign-up copy is going to say more than sign up for my newsletter. It's going to tell someone like, when I get to see a really good pop-up, it should be super obvious. Like, I am the person they have actually been trying to reach. Like, hey, person who likes this and this, I have this thing that you are going to like. And you should have a specific enough audience in mind that when you're writing that pop-up, it's super apparent to someone reading it. Like, oh, yeah, I'm the person this was written for. Okay, give me that newsletter. I want access to that thing. That being said, if I meet someone who has the like claim a spot of land on the internet sort of thing, I'll let you know. That would be a lot easier. But like, all right, here we go. My audience is this. Oh, I will tell you one other thing too, briefly, that Casey Newton, who used to be at The Verge and now has a Substack, once told me. And I say once told me, he told me this earlier this year, but it was in January, which is just like a different universe. He said when he was thinking about building newsletters, I love this, you want to think about a topic and then add a twist. So for instance, he was like, imagine that I just wanted to cover autonomous cars or whatever, like the future of like self-driving cars. Like, that's like kind of broad and specific and a lot of different folks. It was like, but if I decided that I wanted to be like the go-to newsletter on self-driving cars in Arizona, where all the self-driving cars are being piloted, and be like the go-to source, that's an interesting kind of twist. There's a little more specificity there. And then my audience becomes super clear. It's not like anyone interested in self-driving cars. It's people who work in the self-driving car space, who live in Arizona or care about they care about Arizona because they're investors, they're futurists, or whatever it might be, who like the future of their business is tied to the success of this thing here. Like the more specific you can get, like topic and a twist might be another way for you to dive in and try to figure out like, oh, this is who I'm trying to build for.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amazing. Yeah, Chris, feel free.
Sure, Dan, thanks for doing this. My question is, have you thought about the bundling and unbundling of newsletters? Specifically, I guess, because you could take that a lot of different ways. I guess I'm more interested in, you thought about doing collaborations with other people, and how do you approach that?
One, I think some of the kind of bundle experiments that are happening on the web are really smart. And I do think in the long run, is in particular as we're thinking about, and when I say paid newsletters here, what I mean is anyone who's making a living off of like the newsletter is the primary means to grow an audience, and then they're monetizing it. Could be through a subscription, a community, could be through consulting like I do, or events, whatever it might be. There are going to be far more people who succeed by doing it with other partners than to succeed by doing it alone, I think. Now, the bundle experiment is not necessarily new. Like, I worked at the New Yorker, which you could argue is just like a bundle of writers and editors and artists and that sort of thing. It's a publication. But I do think some of this stuff that's happening right now, where we're seeing a couple different writers or creators collaborate together, just makes a lot of sense to me. It allows you to expand your reach. It gives you a support network that's built in. It means that you are not the solo person doing this thing. And I can tell you this, having done this for a while, it's really hard to keep up the pace of doing this thing over and over a long period of time. And having other people who can pitch in and carry the load is pretty valuable. I think it would make a lot of sense if a couple years from now, we see more people who are saying like, I don't have to do this by myself. I actually work with a group of a small handful of folks, and we basically produce just a mini publication. It's a publication, it just happens to be distributed primarily via newsletter or podcast or events or whatever it might be. That makes too much sense for me for us not to see a lot of folks invest in that going forward. Yeah, the other thing I'll add on top of that is just it's tough for me to imagine a future in which there are thousands and thousands of people who are succeeding at huge numbers at scale, where they are like, I have my own, I'm a solo creator with a newsletter that people pay for, and I have enough subscribers to be like profitable and have it be its own business by itself. Like, I think there are going to be people who succeed at this, which is amazing. It's a brand new category, but there's probably only going to be so many winners in that space. It's just really hard to grow and sustain and do. It would make a lot more sense if people working together.
Fantastic. I think Gian, I think you unmuted next. I'll let you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, Dan. Just a quick question, contrarian, if you want.
Sure.
What are the limitations, in your opinion, of email? Because you shared how let's say, it had a comeback after the era of social network, because you cannot have a real relationship without email. But at the same time, it still has some limitations.
Sure.
So what would them be, in your opinion?
So the limitations, one, are depending on what you're trying to do, the stats are not perfect. For instance, if you were to decide to distribute all of your content within the body of the email, I've done a lot of these emails in the past. I call these destination newsletters. The destination is, I open my inbox, I open this email, I read everything here. You don't get any stats in terms of like how much people read, how far people read, how long they spend on your stories. That kind of thing is really frustrating. Man, like people are spending time on this. How long? Like Google Analytics can tell me on my blog, they can't tell me here in the newsletter. That's super frustrating. So there's like some statistical limitations. There's also limitations around the technology to help you send emails. So there is no perfect email service provider. Everyone comes with a little bit of a caveat. Some are really good at automations. Some don't do any automation. Some are amazing in terms of like functionality and integrations. Some aren't so strong. You're limited by some of the choices you make there too. I think in the long run though, the advantages of email, the relationship building, the fact that you're like, there isn't an algorithm in the way between me and my audience, that really outweighs some of the limitations. But email certainly isn't perfect. It just happens to be a really good way to reach people. Plus, email, part of the reason email's made a comeback the last decade or so is, frankly, because of mobile phones. Like, it just got so much easier to read and send email on the go because of iPhones and iOS devices. And so email is one of those pieces of technology. I remember telling people this at BuzzFeed when we got started. We're never going to have to educate somebody on like how to use email. If somebody signs up for my newsletter, there's no process where it's, do you all remember a bunch of years ago, Ira Glass of This American Life produced this podcast or produced this video. It's on YouTube somewhere still, where he, and I think it's his grandma, go and he shows her how to download a podcast on like his iPhone. It's like, all right, so you go and you see this like button here and you got to push this button and then you got to search for this thing and click this. And then here's where it's, and we never have to do that with emails. Do you want to get my newsletter? Cool, you sign up. You know everyone knows where to go and how to use it. It's super universal and that makes it a powerful tool. But by no means it's perfect. It's not perfect. It just happens to be like, email is like the duct tape of the internet. It just works. It always seems to work. It's never the sexiest thing in the world, but it does its job really well.
Fantastic. We'll do maybe one buzzer beater. Yimade, feel free to wrap us up.
Yeah. Okay, so let's have one relates to what you were saying about being able to run your own work. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I just want to ask you about like, the parameter you use to judge your own work, because I have a newsletter that's very niche. I send newsletters about writing to writers, right? And then like when I send it out every Sunday, it gets shared a lot. People respond to it, like they find me. It's a good feeling after.
Yeah.
Then yeah, so last week I found out that a lot of people, like a lot of the subscribers, they had a problem with writing from scratch, like taking their ideas from like their notes to drafts. I wanted to help them break it down. So after writing it, I feel personally like it's the best newsletter I've ever sent out. That's what I feel personally, like it's the best newsletter I've sent out. But then when I sent it out, no feedback, no response, like crickets, basically. So I'm like, how do you in your own mind judge your own work without the metrics that I usually get? Because I was like trying to explain it to one of my friends and I was breaking the newsletter down for her. She was like, dude, this is so good. How did you share it for free with people? And I'm like, people didn't even appreciate it. Like, so I don't know, how do you judge your own work?
I remember when I was at, actually BuzzFeed and the New Yorker both, there were products that we launched that we were like really excited about and thought were really good and that just didn't work for whatever reason. And at BuzzFeed, there was this newsletter we had that was called, it was our fashion newsletter. This is really good. People are going to love this thing. We tried it for a year and nothing happened. And then we got super frustrated and decided to change it and pivot to a different vertical. It became our health and beauty newsletter, different framing, slightly different content. And immediately people were like, that's the thing that I want. I'm like, oh man, we spent a year working on this thing that nobody wanted. Then we just changed the way we pitched it and marketed it. And now you guys want it. Same thing happened at the New Yorker. We had this thing called the Culture Review, which every single week our writers would write about what was happening in culture, but really they just wrote about who Donald Trump had tweeted at that week in like Hollywood. And our writers hated writing it and our readers didn't really know why they had subscribed. They just subscribed because the New Yorker told them that it was going to be good and they trusted us. And they're like, this isn't very good. So then we reached back out to them and we're like, what do you want from us? And in that case, the latter one, people like, a lot of shows on Netflix, too many books and podcasts. Can you just help me figure out what the good stuff is? Yeah. And then we created this thing called the New Yorker Recommends, changed the framework, and it took off. Sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out like how to position and explain your newsletter to people. It could be as simple as just, what is it that I actually do for you and why is it valuable? But it could also mean that the audience that you have is not the audience that you need to have in the long run for this, in which case people are on your list, but they might be on it for the wrong reasons, or they might have signed up not really knowing what they were getting into, and that's okay. You may have to think about, do I need to be reaching a slightly different type of audience or marketing in a different way? I wish I could tell you there was like an exact science to this sort of thing. A lot of this is the mad scientist tinkering and trying stuff until you get to a place where you're like, oh, okay. Like I would remember at BuzzFeed, we would, launch these products, and sometimes they would work and sometimes they wouldn't. But every time we'd be looking, were people signing up? Were we seeing the positive metrics that we wanted in terms of like opens and clicks? Were people writing back to us? Were we getting good responses from our surveys? Like all that stuff, we're just like keeping an eye out. Is this working? And then sometimes things would happen right away. Oh, like I remember we launched this newsletter called it was the 7-Day Better Skin Challenge. It was an automated newsletter. Like we've never launched an automated email like this, 7 days of content. You can sign up today, tomorrow, a year from now. Let's see what happens. And in the first 2 days, 25,000 people signed up, and we never had that happen before. And we're like, I think we hit something. It was like striking gold. It's like we didn't know we were about to do that. It just happened. But yeah, sometimes you have to be a little bit of a mad scientist and tinker and try until you get to a place where it's like, oh, this is the right framing. This is the right audience. I'm pitching it in the right way. It's packaged in the right way. You're just trying a lot of different things until something really clicks into place. I wish I could tell you that there was a magic sort of answer there. A lot of it is tinkering and trying and just being persistent until you get to where you want to go. One more thing I will mention too is like, with email, direction is way more important than speed. Where you are going is more important than how fast you get there. And email in particular just happens to move pretty slowly. It takes a while, and sometimes you're gonna hit moments like that where like, I feel like I should be further along. I feel like things should be going faster. You'll look around your colleagues or people in this group and be like, I was having all the success. Like, we're all on these same calls. We're all learning from one another. Like, why aren't I seeing the same amount of success? And that's okay. You go at your own pace. As long as you're doing the right things. I have this email newsletter. I'm marketing it. I have the technology that I really like in place. Asking for feedback. I'm trying to learn. As long as you're doing the pieces are in place, like in time, you will get there.
Amazing advice. I think that's a perfect note to end on, because I think so much of this conversation has been around that attitude of experimenting, getting input, getting feedback, listening to what reality is trying to tell you. So Dan, maybe this goes without saying, but where should people find you? Because I know you don't send out a newsletter. Where should folks follow up online and follow along with you?
So notanewsletter.com is where my Google Doc lives. You can sign up for email alerts from me and get the onboarding series that I talked about and be alerted when I publish a new one. It's not a traditional newsletter, it's an alert, but that's at signup.notanewsletter.com. And if you want to just read general blog posts from me about what I'm learning, that's at danoshinsky.com.
Amazing. I can't thank you enough, Dan, for making the time. And everybody will send out the recording of this shortly. And I hope everyone leaves here with a bunch of ideas of how to actually leverage email in a way that is unique to the medium, because I think that is certainly what I'm fired up to do. I have 5 pages of notes here. So Dan, thanks again. And thanks everybody for joining.
You're welcome, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Dan.
Awesome. See y'all.
Bye, y'all.